California rapper will spend some of his holiday season preparing to go to trial on assault charges. Will the evidence against A$AP Rocky stand up in court? We're talking to criminal defense attorney Lawrence Zimmerman about the case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. There is another rapper who's going to be headed to court in the new year facing charges for alleged violence. A$AP Rocky, a musical artist, partner of pop sensation Rihanna. He's accused of firing a semi-automatic handgun at a former friend and member of the same hip-hop collective, A AP Relli, or Terrell Efron, and injuring him. Bullet fragments allegedly hit his hand. And this all happened after the two got into some argument 2 years ago. Well, Rocky was arrested at the Los Angeles International Airport in April of 2022. He was released on bail the same day after posting a $550,000 bond. Rocky, whose real name is Rakim Mayers, pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of assault with a firearm. Now, in a recent development during a preliminary hearing on Monday, a Los Angeles judge ruled that there is enough evidence for Rocky to stand trial, which is currently scheduled for January 8th. And he could face years in prison if convicted. Relli also filed a civil suit against Rocky for assault, battery, emotional distress. There are a lot of layers to this, so I want to bring in right now criminal defense attorney Lawrence Zimmerman to talk about the case. Lawrence, so good to have you. Thanks for coming here on Sidebar.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. So first, your reaction to the judge deciding that there is enough evidence to go forward with the criminal trial.
Well, that's not unusual. That's a preliminary hearing. So the standard of proof is only probable cause, which is a very low standard, meaning whether or not someone probably committed a crime. So that's not surprising in the least. Typically, judges normally, unless there's some really, really something strong the defense presents, or something really lacking on the government side, most judges find probable cause.
All right, let's take a sidebar from Sidebar right now to talk about the holiday season, because what is that one phrase that you always hear when talking about gifts? Oh, where'd you get that from? That is where Uncommon Goods comes in. Okay, so what Uncommon Goods does is it makes it super easy for you to find these unique and cool gifts from across the world for your loved ones, your friends, your coworkers. I mean, in the first 10 minutes when I was checking out their website, I found a make-your-own dumpling kit. A lot of people don't know this about me. Huge dumpling guy, okay? And then I found this mini escape the room, solve the case game. It's like a mini foldable piece of luggage that you carry around with you. So now I don't have to gather a bunch of my friends to go to one of these places to play the game. You just do it in our living room. It's just awesome stuff, high quality, different, handmade. It shows the person that you're getting a gift for that you actually put some thought behind the present. It has meaning. It's not some vanilla standard gift that you get in a department store. And when you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're really supporting all kinds of artists and small independent businesses, which is always a great thing. And by the way, with every purchase that you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They've donated more than $2.5 million to date. That is incredible. So to get 15% off of your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/crime10. That's uncommongoods.com/crime10 for 15% off. You really don't want to miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. What do you think was the key piece of evidence to determine that there was enough probable cause here?
For the witness, Efron, his statements, I think there's an audio recording where there are shots heard and the police are identifying A$AP Rocky as the person with the hoodie.
So let's get into that. First, we'll start with what the alleged victim said, Relli. So he testifies in court. And I thought it was interesting because apparently there was this beef between him and Rocky. It was brewing. It seemed like it might have been spawned over financial payments related to the death of their fellow collaborator, A$AP Josh, and how his body was going to be transported. But Relli said that at one point he sees A$AP Rocky and these two friends in front of a parking garage in LA. And CCTV footage, there's no sound in it, where you see allegedly Rocky pushing Relli. And Relli testifies, quote, "He grabbed me on my collar. He was shaking me. I tried to push him off, get his hands off. That's when he pulled a gun from his waistband. It was a standard clip and a semi-automatic black gun. He pointed it toward my stomach. And then he said that Rocky said, 'I'll kill you right now.' And then you could see on the tape what appears to be the men in some type of altercation. Relli says Rocky turned around and shot at me. Said that he was apparently about 16 feet away from him. Said it all looked like a movie, and that he said that Rocky shot 3 or 4 more times at him, and that Relli even used one of his friends there as a human shield. So could it be that that testimony alone was sufficient to say that there's enough to go forward with a trial?
Yeah, absolutely. A judge could give credit to any witness's testimony. The judge is, it's not a jury trial, so the judge is the one who's sitting there determining credibility. So the judge, what we would say, credited Efron's testimony and found it reliable, then absolutely that could be the sole basis for probable cause. Again, not a trial where the burden's proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
The problem is, I would say, look, this is at this point, like you said, the standard's much lower, but is it enough to ultimately convict ASAP Rocky? Well, that's where it gets interesting, because his attorney, Joe Tacopina, he argued during this preliminary hearing that there wasn't enough evidence. And one of the things that he said was there was a detective that testified that Rocky was seen on other surveillance footage holding a gun in his hand during the altercation. Tacopina says that's not his client, that this surveillance video allegedly shows an area near this fight. This is different surveillance footage, and there are 2 loud pops that can be heard, but you don't actually see the shooting. What you do see is a man running around the corner, then appears to slow down to a walking pace. The detective says that is ASAP Rocky because they compared that, a still image of the CCTV footage of this guy in a sweatshirt, can't see his face, holding what appears to be a gun, with another image from a video where you see his face, but you don't see the gun. They say it's Rocky. So they're combining these images, and they don't have a clear video of the shooting. They don't have a clear video of ASAP Rocky, firing the gun and doing this, because that would be probably a smoking gun. But they're piecing it together. And Tacopina says that's not enough.
Well, I mean, it may not be enough, and obviously Tacopina is a great lawyer, and the police and the prosecutors will have to piece all that evidence together, and I'm sure showing some sort of chronological time log, lining it up with the video. But that, if you're a prosecutor, that's not really how you want to prosecute ASAP Rocky. You'd want to have much harder evidence, and we don't know the backstory. There may be, who knows why this guy Efron may be lying about Rocky. Again, jealousy. You sort of mentioned at the top over a friend. And he may be lying. And so this may not be ASAP Rocky, obviously. That's why we have trials. And certainly doesn't sound like there's hard proof right now, right? I mean, and if Rocky was in the vicinity for another reason, someone else fired the shot. I mean, these are all things that will come out in due time as when the trial gets closer or when the trial happens.
How complicated is it for prosecutors that the gun has never been found? Because police executed a search warrant on Rocky. They never found the weapon. Before we even get into the issue of the shell casings, which we will get into in a minute, if you don't have the actual weapon that was allegedly used here, is that a real big hurdle for the prosecutors?
I mean, it's definitely a hurdle. I mean, it's not insurmountable, but if you're a prosecutor, you would certainly like for there to be the weapon used. And if you're a defense lawyer, that gives you more room to create doubt as well. I mean, now we don't know if there's any fingerprints on that gun. Got to match it up with the 9mm shell casings, which you're going to talk about. There's nothing in Rocky's house showing he had that kind of firearm. So those are all favorable for defense. I mean, these could have just been 2 shots that went off in a parking lot or somewhere nearby. And this guy Efron's claiming he was shot at. Who knows? Try to make up some story about Rocky.
Yeah, and I'm sure prosecutors would say, well, of course we don't have the gun, he got rid of it or something like that. I will say Tacopina made another interesting argument about the video and the person holding this item, because he says he was trying to press the detective a little bit. You don't know if it's a gun or not, and you don't even know if it's operable or not. I thought that was an interesting line of questioning.
Right, because in order to be charged with certain crimes, if it's possession of a firearm during commission of a felony, they have to show that the gun was operable. I mean, they can still probably.
And if it was in fact a gun, if it was a gun in his hands.
Correct. Yeah. That would make sense to be holding a non-operable firearm, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, unless there was it was a prop of some kind and it was using it as a threat. I don't know. That's kind of speculating. But I do want to ask you about the shell casings, because This is fascinating. So, the shell casings that were found at the scene, no fingerprints on them. And Tacopina attempted to show that 7 officers had searched the scene of the alleged shooting for 20 minutes after this, found no evidence, and the 9mm shell casings actually were turned over to police by Relli, by Efron, the victim in this case. He comes back to the scene an hour after the incident. What do you make of that?
So I think that's like the best piece of evidence for the defense, that the police, who are supposedly the experts in searching crime scenes, finding, looking at ballistics, finding shell casings, don't find anything. And all of a sudden, miraculously, after nothing's found an hour later, the guy who has a beef with Rocky ASAP comes back with the shell casings. That to me is like talk about a great piece of evidence for the defense. I mean, that's fantastic.
It's weird. I'm not going to lie to you. It's weird. And he said, my understanding is Relli said, look, I didn't immediately call 911. I waited 2 days because I wanted to retain a lawyer first. Your thoughts on that? Because him holding on to the shell casings and then getting a lawyer and then contacting police. What do you think?
Those are all terrible pieces of evidence. It's all terrible for the prosecution. That's great for A$AP Rocky. Anybody who's in fear for their life is getting shot at is going to call the police ASAP, no pun intended, or pun intended. And, and then you hired a lawyer. That looks to me and smells like someone who's looking for a money settlement, now threatening to use the criminal laws to get that money. So that's what it reeks like to me. I mean, that's good for A$AP Rocky.
And so, look, I mean, enough evidence to go forward with a trial, but this could be problematic for the prosecution, adding on top of the fact that there was a photo that was introduced into evidence of Relli's injuries. I think you could argue perhaps somewhat minor. I mean, if there was a real shooting, thank goodness no one was killed or severely injured. And you see like these bloody skin on his knuckles on his left hand where he says the bullet fragments hit. But one of the things Tacopina pointed out was Relli waited till he was in New York. I was in Los Angeles, waited till he was in New York to be treated for the injuries. Well, how does that factor into this?
Again, another great piece of evidence. I mean, someone fires a shot at you from 16 feet. They miss, give them your knuckles. You don't call the police. You don't even do anything, get treatment. I mean, how serious could it have been? It sounds like someone who's full of it. I mean, that setting aside the initial stuff as far as probable cause, these pieces of evidence certainly create a wide opening for the defense to push through a not guilty or dismissal. I mean, in this case may never reach trial. If Tacopina can take what he asserted at the prelim, which is a lot of times what you do as a lawyer, you set up your defense for later, then present the prosecution with that evidence, then they may end up in a dismissal.
He got called out by the judge a little bit too. I mean, I think he said in court, when looking at this photo, it's a miracle that he survived. He was being sarcastic. That kind of tone, he was told to check it a little bit. Is that a problem in that kind of criminal trial?
No, if you're not getting admonished from the judge about your attitude, you're not doing your job. You get what the judge has.
Is that what you think?
100%. I'm not worried about the judge. I'm worried about the jury. I'm worried about making my case, representing my client. Lawyers are worried about getting objected to during opening statements because they make an argument. I always tell lawyers, if you're not getting objected to an opening argument, then you're not really doing a good job.
That's so funny. But Lawrence, when you think about the evidence, I believe only 2 witnesses testified in this preliminary hearing. There are going to be more that testify at an upcoming trial, potentially other eyewitnesses to what Rocky allegedly did. I'm reminded of the Tory Lanez, Megan Thee Stallion case. A little bit different, some bad evidence there for Tory Lanez. He was convicted, sentenced to 10 years in prison. But even though we've been calling out some of the deficiencies in what we see in the prosecution's case, they feel they have enough to actually go forward with it. They feel they have enough to convict him as of right now.
Well, they always do. That's the game they're playing, or they just may not understand the defense. But if, like I said, if Tacopina's laid the correct foundation, they can present that evidence, they may rethink their position, or they just may, let's see if we can get a conviction and see what happens. And, with what we've just talked about, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of holes in the prosecution's case, especially the delay, especially with the fact that the fact that he presented the shell casings to me is like a big, big red flag as far as bringing this case against A$AP Rocky.
So that's the criminal case, right? And when we talk about the standards, he's also being sued where the standard is lower. So Relli is suing Rocky, and he's claiming, quote, in the lawsuit that Rocky pulled out a handgun, purposely pointed it in the direction of Relli, fired multiple shots. Relli was struck by bullet projectiles or fragments in his left hand, required medical attention, and he is seeking at least $25,000 in damages. Walk me through what we can expect from the civil case. So in other words, even if the criminal case were to be dismissed, that doesn't necessarily affect the civil case, right?
Yeah, well, gosh, I'm probably dating myself at this point, but the easiest example I always tell people is remember O.J. Simpson. He was acquitted in criminal court and found, liable in civil court. So they'll just sue him civilly and get a judgment, and there the standard of proof is preponderance of evidence. So more likely than not that, 51% to 49% of the evidence shows he committed the crime. And so then they could award a judgment. He's not asking for a lot of money. So the fact that he filed a civil suit certainly helps create doubt in a criminal case. But if he's only asking for $25,000, I think that doesn't help as much as you would want it to help in a criminal case. Because if he's suing for $10 million, then clearly you could argue this is all a lie. This guy just wants to get rich off the back of A$AP Rocky.
Right. And because the extent of the injuries are, relatively minor, he is suing him for assault, battery, emotional distress. How much does the fact that he has these grazing on his knuckles as the only kind of physical injury? I mean, he is suing for emotional distress.
I mean, it certainly plays a factor into it. I think his injuries, obviously, I don't know how emotionally distressed he could be from the graze. I mean, obviously someone pulled a firearm and shot at him. I don't know his background and history if he's been involved in shootings before. If it was me, certainly it'd be pretty frightening. So it's hard to gauge. I think his background would play a factor into it. But yeah, certainly the distress getting shot at, the injuries are not substantial at all.
Lawrence Zimmerman, interesting case. Appreciate your perspective, sir. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Thank you.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.